The streets of Manhattan were drenched in a relentless downpour, the city's usual vibrancy muted by the somber patter of rain. Neon lights reflected off the puddles, casting fractured glows along the deserted avenues. The distant siren wail cut through the air, blending with the hurried footfalls of those seeking refuge from the storm. Amid this cacophony, an imposing black car glided down one of the quieter streets, its sleek silhouette defying the gloom. Behind the wheel was Alexander Whitman, a billionaire whose life was marked by relentless ambition and emotional isolation. For once, Alexander had chosen to drive alone. No security detail shadowed him. No driver steered his car through the city's labyrinth. Tonight, he sought solace in solitude, his thoughts preoccupied with the monumental deal he was about to close, a tech acquisition that promised to reshape his empire. Yet, beneath his sharp focus on the agreement lay a faint, unacknowledged unease, a void his wealth could never fill. His musings shattered abruptly when a figure darted into the street ahead. The car screeched to a halt, tires slicing through water and sending a spray into the air. Alexander's heart pounded as he threw open the door, stepping into the rain to confront what he assumed would be the carelessness of a distracted pedestrian. Instead, he found a scene he would not soon forget. A woman knelt on the rain-slicked asphalt, her arms wrapped protectively around a small boy. The child's sobs were audible even over the pounding rain. Towering over them was a man with a menacing presence, his clothes ragged, his posture threatening. For a fleeting moment, the billionaire and the stranger locked eyes, and Alexander recognized the cold, calculating desperation of someone with nothing to lose. It was a moment of decision. Alexander stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Step away from them," he commanded, his tone sharp and unyielding. The stranger hesitated, caught off guard by the authority in Alexander's voice. But the man wasn't easily cowed, and a dangerous glint flickered in his eyes as he sized up the billionaire. The woman glanced up, her wide, tear-filled eyes silently pleading for help. Alexander's gaze met hers, and in that instant, his world shifted. For years, he had built walls to shield himself from personal connections, but something in her expression, raw fear, fragile strength, pierced his defenses. "Last warning," Alexander growled, taking a step closer. The rain pelted harder as if the storm was witnessing the standoff. Finally, after a tense pause, the man backed away, disappearing into the city's shadows. Alexander turned to the woman, his expression softening as he knelt beside her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice calm now, though the adrenaline coursed through him. The woman shook her head, clutching the boy tightly. She was visibly trembling, not from the rain but from the terror she had just endured. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "You don't have to," Alexander replied firmly, "but you need to get out of this rain. Come on." As he helped them, something stirred within Alexander, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Little did he know, this chance encounter on a rainy night in Manhattan would begin a transformation far more significant than anything his fortune could have predicted. The rain had eased into a steady drizzle when Alexander led the woman and her son to the side of the street. The boy's small hands clung tightly to her soaked coat, his tear-streaked face buried against her shoulder. Alexander retrieved an umbrella from the car and held it over them, shielding them from the relentless drops. His sharp eyes scanned the dimly lit street for any sign of the man threatening them, but the shadows swallowed the assailant whole. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice calm yet commanding. "Mia," she replied hesitantly, her wide eyes flicking toward him. "This is Lucas." Alexander nodded, his gaze briefly settling on the boy, who peeked out from the safety of his mother's arms. The child's eyes were filled with fear and curiosity, a fragile innocence that tugged at something long buried in Alexander's heart. "Why was that man after you?" he asked, his tone steady but laced with urgency. Mia hesitated, her lips trembling as she tried to find the words. I don't know. He's been following us. I think he works for someone I owe money to." Alexander's jaw tightened. He had seen desperation like this before, in business rivals crushed under debt, in the shadowy figures who thrived on exploiting the vulnerable. It was a world he had distanced himself from, but tonight, it felt uncomfortably close. "You and Lucas can't stay out here," he said firmly, glancing toward his car. "I'll take you somewhere safe." Mia shook her head, her arms tightening around her son. "I can't. I don't even know you. And you didn't know that man either," Alexander countered, his voice softening as he gestured toward Lucas. "Look at him. Do you want to risk staying here if that guy returns?" The logic was undeniable. Reluctantly, Mia nodded. Alexander opened the back door of his car and gestured for them to get in. Mia hesitated, her protective instincts warring with her fear of the unknown. Finally, she climbed into the car, keeping Lucas on her lap as if she could shield him from the world itself. Alexander took the wheel, navigating the slick streets with practiced ease. The car's luxurious interior offered a stark contrast to the chill outside, but the tension in the air was palpable. He glanced at Mia in the rearview mirror. She sat stiffly, her wary eyes darting between him and the passing cityscape. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice trembling. "A hotel," Alexander replied. "You'll be safe there for the night." Mia exhaled, her shoulders sagging slightly. Sensing the change in her, Lucas rested his head against her chest and closed his eyes. Alexander's mind raced as the car wove through Manhattan's rain-slicked streets. He had no idea why he was going out of his way for these strangers. This wasn't like him. He was a man who lived by numbers, deals, and strategies, not emotions or chance encounters. And yet, something about Mia and Lucas felt different, like a crack in the armor he had worn for so long. The sleek car pulled into the circular driveway of an opulent hotel, its golden lights glowing warmly against the dreary night. A doorman rushed to meet them, holding an umbrella as Alexander stepped out. He opened the back door for Mia, who climbed out cautiously, still clutching Lucas. Alexander turned to the doorman. "Have a suite prepared. Something secure." "Yes, Mr. Whitman," the man replied, recognizing the billionaire instantly. Mia hesitated, her gaze darting between Alexander and the hotel's grand entrance. "I don't belong here," she murmured. Alexander's expression softened, but his tone remained firm. "You belong where you're safe." Inside, the lobby's marble floors and crystal chandeliers seemed almost surreal to Mia. She kept her head down as they followed the concierge to the elevator, Lucas's small hand gripping hers tightly. Alexander walked beside them, his presence both protective and imposing. When they reached the suite, Mia's eyes widened at the sight of the spacious room. A plush sofa, a gleaming coffee table, and a king-sized bed dominated the space. She set Lucas down, and he immediately ran to the window, pressing his small hands against the glass to look at the city below. This is too much," Mia stammered, turning to Alexander. "It's what you need," he replied simply. "Rest, get warm. I'll take care of the rest." He pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to her. "My number. If you need anything, call me." Mia stared at the card, her fingers trembling. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know us." Alexander hesitated, his gaze drifting to Lucas. "Maybe I've spent too much time ignoring what I should care about," he said quietly. Before Mia could respond, he turned and left, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the boy, who now dozed peacefully on the bed. In the lobby, Alexander paused to speak with the hotel manager, ensuring that extra security would be stationed near their suite. As he exited the rain again, his thoughts turned to Mia's earlier question. Why was he doing this? He didn't have an answer, not yet. Mia stood by the window in the suite, watching the rain streak down the glass. She looked over at Lucas, his small frame curled up on the bed, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude mixed with unease. The man who had saved them was a stranger, but he had shown more kindness in a single evening than she had experienced in years. She didn't know that Alexander's decision to help her would soon unravel secrets neither of them could have imagined, intertwining their lives in ways that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves. The morning light filtered through the hotel curtains, casting a soft glow across the room where Mia and Lucas slept soundly. Alexander had been up for hours, pacing his penthouse apartment across town. He could not focus on anything else despite trying to push the previous night from his mind. He stared at the New York City skyline, the weight of his decision to help Mia and Lucas pressing heavily on him. Picking up his phone, Alexander made a call. "Thomas, I need information. Find out everything you can about a woman named Mia Cortez. She's staying at the Whitman Regency." His assistant hesitated, surprised by the unusual request. "Understood, Mr. Whitman. Anything specific you're looking for?" "Everything," Alexander replied curtly. Within hours, a detailed report landed in his inbox. Alexander sat down with a coffee he didn't touch, scanning through the file. Mia Cortez, 28, a single mother, worked multiple jobs to provide for her son. They lived in a rundown apartment in the Bronx. The man from the night before, Michael Ross, was a known enforcer for David Kessler, a loan shark and former business rival of Alexander's. As he read, Alexander's jaw tightened. The name David Kessler was one he hadn't encountered in years, but it brought a flood of bitter memories. A decade ago, Kessler had been a relentless competitor, their rivalry culminating in a business deal that had ended Kessler's career and left Alexander triumphant. But Alexander had underestimated the depths of Kessler's grudge. Kessler had resurfaced, and Mia and Lucas were caught in his web. Alexander felt a strange mixture of guilt and protectiveness. He had no direct connection to Mia's plight, but his past decisions had undoubtedly contributed to the dangers she now faced. Without a second thought, Alexander decided to visit Mia at the hotel. He didn't trust anyone else to handle this. When Alexander arrived at the hotel suite, he knocked softly. A moment later, Mia opened the door, her expression shifting from surprise to guarded apprehension. She still looked tired, but there was a quiet strength in how she carried herself. "Mr. Whitman," she said, her voice unsure. "I didn't expect to see you again." "Call me Alexander," he replied faintly, stepping inside. He glanced toward Lucas, who was playing with a small toy car on the floor. "How are you both holding up?" Mia hesitated, then nodded. "We're fine. Thank you for everything you've done. I don't know why you're helping us." Alexander's expression grew serious as he sat down on the sofa. "I did some digging. The man who threatened you last night, Michael Ross, works for someone I know. David Kessler." Mia froze, her face draining of color. She sat down across from him, gripping her hands tightly. "Kessler," she whispered. "He's the one I borrowed money from. Lucas was sick, and I couldn't afford his hospital bills. I thought I could pay it back, but it got worse. Ross won't stop until he gets what he wants." Her voice broke, and she glanced at Lucas, oblivious to the conversation. "I'm scared," she admitted, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know how to protect him anymore." Alexander leaned forward, his tone firm but reassuring. "You don't have to face this alone, Mia. Kessler is dangerous, but I've dealt with men like him before. I'll make sure he and Ross don't bother you again." Mia stared at him, searching his face for any hint of ulterior motives. But Alexander's expression was sincere, his eyes reflecting a determination that left no room for doubt. "Why?" she asked finally, her voice trembling. "Why would you do that for us?" Alexander hesitated, the question cutting deeper than he expected. "Because I've seen what men like Kessler do to people who can't fight back," he said quietly. "And because I'm tired of standing by when I can make a difference." Mia wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander stood, his posture radiating purpose. "I'll make arrangements for you and Lucas to stay somewhere safer. In the meantime, I need you to trust me. I'll handle Kessler." Mia nodded again, though her unease was still evident. As Alexander turned to leave, Lucas ran up to him, holding out his toy car. "Are you coming back?" Lucas asked, his wide eyes staring up at Alexander. Alexander crouched down, meeting the boy's gaze. "Yes," he said simply. "I'll be back." As Alexander left the suite, his mind was already racing with strategies. Taking on Kessler wouldn't be easy. He was ruthless, cunning, and well-connected. But Alexander wasn't the type to back down from a challenge, especially when lives were at stake. Back in his car, he called Thomas. "I need a full dossier on Kessler. Associates, finances, recent activities, everything." "Understood, sir," Thomas replied. And Thomas, Alexander added, his voice steely. Make it fast. For Mia, the hours passed in a haze of anxiety. She tried to focus on Lucas, playing games with him to keep his spirits up, but the looming shadow of Kessler weighed heavily on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were on the brink of something irreversible. As Lucas slept soundly in the hotel bed that night, Mia sat by the window, staring at the city lights. She thought about Alexander, his sudden appearance in their lives, his unwavering confidence, and the quiet strength he carried. She felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in a long while. But hope, she reminded herself, was a fragile thing. And in their world, it was often fleeting. The morning after their conversation, Alexander sat in his office, the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting off the glossy desk. In front of him was a detailed file on David Kessler, compiled by Thomas overnight. The report confirmed what Alexander suspected. Kessler had rebuilt his empire in the shadows, aligning himself with criminal figures, including Michael Ross, to enforce his operations. It was a sprawling network of extortion, blackmail, and money laundering, and Mia had inadvertently become ensnared in it. Alexander closed the file, his expression grim. It was clear that confronting Kessler would require precision and resolve. This wasn't just about protecting Mia and Lucas. It was about dismantling a system that thrived on exploiting the weak. He redialed Thomas. Arrange a meeting with our private security team. I want round-the-clock protection for Mia and Lucas, but it is discreet. They shouldn't feel like prisoners. And Kessler? Thomas asked, his voice cautious. Alexander's eyes narrowed. I'll deal with him. But first, I need leverage. At the hotel, Mia was packing her belongings when Alexander arrived unannounced. Lucas ran to greet him, his small face lighting up with excitement. Are we leaving? Lucas asked eagerly. Alexander crouched down, ruffling the boy's hair. Yes, we are. But you'll be safe where we're going. Mia watched the interaction, her nervousness tempered by Alexander's calm demeanor. Where are you taking us? She asked. My estate, Alexander replied simply. It's secure, and my staff will ensure you have everything you need. Mia hesitated, her instinct to protect Lucas at odds with her growing trust in Alexander. Are you sure this is necessary? It's the only way to keep you safe while I handle Kessler, Alexander said firmly. He won't stop until I stop him. Reluctantly, Mia nodded, gathering Lucas's things. Alexander led them to his car, where his driver was already waiting. As the city's chaos faded into the quiet luxury of Westchester County, Mia couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The Whitman estate was nothing short of breathtaking. The sprawling property boasted manicured gardens, a private lake, and a mansion that seemed to rise from the earth like a castle. Lucas's wide-eyed wonder as they arrived offered a brief reprieve from Mia's anxiety. Alexander escorted them inside, where a team of staff greeted them with quiet professionalism. This is your home for now, he told Mia, his voice steady but kind. You'll be safe here. He showed them to a suite of rooms on the second floor. The space was warm and inviting, with plush furnishings and large windows overlooking the estate. Lucas immediately began exploring, his laughter echoing through the halls. Mia, however, was less at ease. As Alexander turned to leave, she called after him. What are you going to do about Kessler? Alexander paused, his back to her. I'm going to confront him, he said after a moment, but not recklessly. I've dealt with men like him before. Men like him don't play fair, Mia said, stepping closer. You don't know what he's capable of. Alexander turned, his gaze meeting hers. I know exactly what he's capable of, Mia. That's why I need you to trust me. Mia hesitated, then nodded. Just be careful, she said softly. Later that evening, Alexander retreated to his study, a grand room lined with bookshelves and illuminated by the soft glow of a fireplace. He called one of his contacts in the city, a former investigator turned private consultant named Nathan Cross. Nathan, I need your expertise, Alexander began. Alexander Whitman, Nathan replied, his tone curious. It's been a while. What's the problem? David Kessler, Alexander said bluntly. I need everything you can dig up on his current operations, especially anything tying him to Michael Ross. Nathan whistled low. Kessler? You don't aim low, do you? He's been flying under the radar for years, which means he's hiding something, Alexander said. Find it. Over the next few days, life at the estate settled into an uneasy routine. Mia and Lucas adjusted to their new surroundings, though Mia remained wary of the opulence and what it represented. Lucas, on the other hand, thrived. He explored the gardens, played with toys provided by the staff, and even began to laugh again. Alexander watched them from a distance, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just about a vendetta, but about giving Mia and Lucas a chance at a fear-free life. When Nathan finally called back, the news wasn't good. Kessler's got his fingers in many pies, Nathan said. But here's the kicker. He's been quietly building alliances with some of the city's most dangerous players. He's preparing for something big, Alexander. And I think Mia and Lucas are pawns in a much larger game. Alexander's grip tightened on the phone. Then we need to move quickly. Nathan hesitated. There's one more thing. Kessler's network is tied to an old warehouse in Brooklyn. It's where he operates under the radar. If you're looking for a confrontation, that's where you'll find him. Alexander's jaw set. Good. It's time to finish this. The tension in the estate grew palpable as Alexander prepared for the showdown. Mia sensed it, though he tried to shield her from the details. One evening, as they sat in the living room while Lucas played nearby, Mia finally confronted him. What are you planning? She asked, her voice steady but insistent. Alexander met her gaze. I'm going to confront Kessler at his warehouse. It's the only way to draw him out and end this. Mia's eyes widened. That's too dangerous. You don't know what he'll do. I know exactly what he'll do, Alexander said. That's why I need to control the situation. Mia shook her head. You're putting yourself at risk. What if he... Alexander reached out, taking her hand. Mia, I promise you, I won't let anything happen to you or Lucas. But this is something I have to do. After a long pause, Mia nodded, though her fear was evident. Just come back to us, she said quietly. Alexander's grip tightened on her hand. I will. The following night, Alexander stood in his study, staring out at the sprawling gardens of his estate. The tranquility outside was a stark contrast to the storm raging within him. Every detail of the plan had been meticulously laid out. His private security team, armed and prepared, was stationed around the estate to protect Mia and Lucas. But his battle would be fought far from this sanctuary. Mia entered the room quietly. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them in front of her. Are you sure about this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander turned to face her. This is the only way to ensure your safety. Kessler won't stop until he's forced to. If I wait, I'm putting you and Lucas in even greater danger. Mia searched his face for any trace of doubt, but found none. Then promise me you'll come back, she said, her voice breaking slightly. Alexander stepped closer, his intense gaze meeting hers. I promise. Hours later, under the cover of night, Alexander's black SUV pulled up to the derelict warehouse in Brooklyn. The area was desolate, the city's faint hum muted by the industrial district's oppressive silence. His private consultant, Nathan Cross, had coordinated with the security team to set up surveillance around the perimeter. Alexander's arrival was the signal to begin. The warehouse loomed like a shadow of its former purpose. Broken windows, rusted metal, and a faint smell of decay clung to the air. Alexander stepped out of the SUV, adjusting his coat against the biting wind. His footsteps echoed as he approached the entrance, the sound bouncing off the cracked concrete. Nathan's voice crackled in his earpiece. You're inside. Keep your eyes open. Kessler isn't the type to fight fair. Alexander smirked grimly. I wouldn't expect anything less. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit by a few flickering fluorescent lights. Crates and abandoned machinery cast long, eerie shadows. Alexander's every step was deliberate, his eyes scanning for movement. He could feel Kessler's presence before he even saw him. Whitman, a voice called out from the shadows, smooth and venomous. You always did have a flair for dramatics. David Kessler emerged from the darkness, dressed sharply despite the grim setting. His eyes gleamed with malice, his posture relaxed but predatory. I didn't think you'd have the courage to show up alone. Alexander's jaw tightened. I'm not here to play games, Kessler. This ends tonight. Kessler chuckled, the sound hollow and cruel. You've always been predictable, Whitman. You think this is about revenge, don't you? But it's not. It's about power. And you, my old friend, are standing in my way. Suddenly, Kessler raised his hand, and two armed men stepped out from the shadows, their guns trained on Alexander. Did you think I'd let you waltz in here unchallenged? Kessler sneered. Alexander didn't flinch. You underestimate me, Kessler, he said, calm but laced with menace. Before Kessler could respond, the warehouse doors burst open. Alexander's security team stormed in, weapons drawn, taking Kessler's men by surprise. Chaos erupted as gunfire echoed through the cavernous space. Alexander seized the moment, lunging toward Kessler, who staggered back, his smug confidence faltering. Kessler drew a knife, slashing wildly, but Alexander dodged with calculated precision. The two men grappled, their long-standing rivalry culminating in a brutal, physical confrontation. Alexander managed to disarm Kessler, pinning him against a metal beam. It's over, Kessler, Alexander growled, his voice low but firm. But Kessler only laughed, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. You think this ends with me? You've barely scratched the surface, Whitman. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air as the police arrived, summoned by Nathan's team. Kessler's men, now subdued, were hauled away in handcuffs. Alexander handed Kessler over to the authorities, his steely gaze unyielding as the man who had tormented so many was led out of the warehouse. Nathan approached, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. You all right? Alexander nodded, brushing off his coat. Better than Kessler, I'd imagine. Nathan gave a dry chuckle. This isn't over, you know? Kessler's got connections. He'll try to fight this from behind bars. Let him try, Alexander said. I'll be ready. When Alexander returned to the estate early in the mornings, she waited for him in the living room. She stood as he entered, eyes scanning him for any sign of injury. You're back, she whispered, a mixture of relief and disbelief. I promised, Alexander said simply, his exhaustion evident but his presence steady. Mia crossed the room in an instant, throwing her arms around him. He stiffened for a moment and used to such displays of emotion, but then relaxed, letting himself return the embrace. What happens now? She asked, looking back at him. Now, we rebuild, Alexander said. Kessler's empire is crumbling, and with the evidence we've gathered, the authorities will ensure it doesn't rise again. But it'll take time. Mia nodded, her expression resolute. And us? Alexander hesitated, the weight of everything they'd been through reflected in his eyes. That's up to you, he said softly. Lucas appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing his eyes. Mom, is it over? Mia turned, her face lighting up with a warmth Alexander hadn't seen before. Yes, sweetheart. It's over. Alexander crouched down, opening his arms as Lucas ran to him. Holding the boy close, he felt something shift within him, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with wealth or power. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Alexander, Mia, and Lucas sat on the balcony, the previous night's chaos giving way to a quiet peace. For the first time in years, Alexander imagined a future beyond boardrooms and balance sheets, a future defined by the people sitting beside him. Mia turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. You saved us, Alexander. No, he replied, his voice steady but gentle. We saved each other. And as the sun rose higher, illuminating the estate with a golden glow, Alexander knew this was just the beginning. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, stronger, united, and unbreakable. The days following Kessler's arrest were a whirlwind of activity. The media exploded with coverage of the takedown of one of New York's most notorious shadow figures. Alexander's name was mentioned repeatedly. Some heralded him as a hero, while others questioned his motives. But Alexander paid little attention to the headlines. His focus remained on two things: ensuring Kessler's network was dismantled and protecting Mia and Lucas. In his estate's grand library, Alexander sat at a long oak table, surrounded by files and documents. His legal team, led by the sharp and unrelenting Samantha Lee, worked tirelessly to ensure Kessler's empire would crumble in court. Samantha, a no-nonsense attorney with a reputation for taking down corporate criminals, leaned over the table, pointing to a highlighted section of a document. "This is the key," she said. "Kessler's financial ties to organized crime. We'll use this to press additional charges. But we need testimony from someone on the inside to solidify the case." Alexander nodded. "What about Nathan's investigation into Kessler's shell companies? Can we use that?" Samantha hesitated. "It's strong evidence, but Kessler's legal team will argue it's circumstantial. If we can get someone from his inner circle to turn, it'll be a slam dunk." As they strategized, Mia entered the room quietly, holding a tray with coffee and snacks. She set it down on the table, drawing Alexander's attention. "You don't have to do that," Alexander said softly, his tone warming as he looked at her. "I want to help," Mia replied. "You're doing so much for us. I need to do something, even if it's small." Alexander's gaze lingered on her for a moment, the unspoken connection between them growing more assertive. Despite the progress being made, tension hung in the air. Alexander's security team reported unusual activity around the estate. Unmarked cars parked nearby, drones hovering just beyond the property's perimeter. It was clear that Kessler's allies were watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Alexander found Mia sitting on the balcony, staring at the darkening sky. She held a steaming mug of tea in her hands, her posture tense. "What's on your mind?" Alexander asked, sitting beside her. Mia sighed, her gaze distant. "I keep thinking about how easily Kessler's people found us before. Even here, I don't feel completely safe. What if he has someone working on the inside? What if he—" Alexander reached out, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "I won't let anything happen to you or Lucas. I've reinforced security. Every person on this estate has been vetted. If Kessler's people come near, we'll know." Mia nodded, though the fear in her eyes lingered. "It's not just about us, Alexander. You're putting yourself in danger for me and Lucas." "Why?" Alexander's expression softened. "Because you deserve to live without fear. And because I want to be part of more than just building companies and making money. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm fighting for something real." Mia looked at him, her heart aching with gratitude and something more profound. "Thank you," she whispered. The day of Kessler's trial arrived, and the courthouse buzzed with reporters and onlookers. Inside the courtroom, Alexander sat beside Samantha and Mia. Lucas, too young to be part of the proceedings, remained at the estate under the care of Alexander's trusted staff. Kessler entered the courtroom, his once arrogant demeanor subdued but not entirely gone. He still carried himself with an air of defiance, as if he believed he could escape justice. Samantha delivered a compelling opening argument detailing Kessler's extensive criminal activities. She outlined his use of shell companies, his ties to organized crime, and the fear he instilled in those who couldn't fight back. The evidence was damning, but Kessler's defense team fought back fiercely, attempting to discredit witnesses and undermine the prosecution's case. The turning point came when a key witness took the stand, Victor Reyes, a former associate of Kessler's who had agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. Reyes's testimony painted a vivid picture of Kessler's operations, detailing how he manipulated, threatened, and exploited countless victims. When Samantha asked Reyes about Mia and Lucas, his response sent a ripple through the courtroom. Kessler wanted to use them as leverage, Reyes admitted. He didn't care about the money she owed. He just wanted to send a message to anyone who thought they could stand up to him. Mia's breath caught as the weight of Reyes's words sank in. She glanced at Alexander, who placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. The prosecution rested its case, and Kessler's defense team scrambled to counter. But the sheer weight of evidence, combined with the emotional impact of Mia's testimony and Reyes's damning account, left them with little ground to stand on. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The judge's voice rang out in the silent courtroom. "We find the defendant, David Kessler, guilty on all counts." The room erupted in whispers as Kessler's composure finally cracked. He stood, shouting threats and denials as the bailiffs escorted him away. "This isn't over," he yelled, echoing through the room. Mia exhaled sharply, tears streaming down her face. Alexander turned to her, his expression soft. "It's over," he said quietly. Mia nodded, her hand reaching for his. "Because of you." As they left the courthouse, reporters swarmed them, shouting questions. Alexander shielded Mia as they made their way to the waiting car. Once inside, the tension began to melt away, replaced by a quiet sense of relief. "Thank you," Mia said, her voice trembling with emotion. Alexander shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. You and Lucas gave me something worth fighting for." Lucas ran to greet them back at the estate, his laughter filling the air. Mia scooped him up, holding him tightly as tears of joy streamed down her face. Alexander watched the scene, his heart packed in a way he hadn't felt before. He knew the battle was over, but the journey was just beginning. That night, as the three of them sat together under the stars, Mia turned to Alexander. "What happens now?" Alexander smiled, the warmth in his expression unmistakable. "Now, we start living." The days following Kessler's conviction began a profound transformation for Alexander, Mia, and Lucas. Once a fortress against impending danger, the estate felt like a home. A sense of hope and renewal gradually replaced the shadows of fear looming over their lives. Yet, the journey was far from over. Alexander, ever the strategist, turned his attention to the aftermath of Kessler's downfall. He convened with Samantha and Nathan in his study. Their conversation focused on dismantling the remnants of Kessler's empire. "There's still a lot of work to do," Samantha said, leaning over a map that outlined Kessler's network. "His allies might try to fill the power vacuum he left behind. We need to ensure they don't get the chance." Nathan nodded. Kessler's conviction sent a strong message, but loose ends remain. Some of his men might try to retaliate, even without him. Alexander's gaze was steely. "We'll cut off every last connection he has. No one else should have to live in fear because of him." As they strategized, Mia entered the room, her presence a reminder of why Alexander was fighting so hard. She carried a plate of sandwiches, placing them on the table with a small smile. "Thought you might need a break," she said. Alexander's expression softened. "Thank you, Mia. How's Lucas?" "He's doing well," she replied. "He's out in the garden with your staff. I think he's starting to feel safe again." Hearing this, Alexander felt a surge of determination. Kessler's empire wasn't just about money or power. It was about the lives it had disrupted and the futures it had stolen. Ensuring its destruction wasn't just a duty, it was personal. Despite the work ahead, Alexander became more drawn to Mia and Lucas. Their presence filled a void he hadn't even realized existed. As the sun set over the estate one evening, Alexander joined Mia on the balcony. Lucas was fast asleep, and the quiet offered them a rare reflection moment. Mia looked out at the horizon, her expression contemplative. "It still feels surreal," she admitted. "A few weeks ago, I was running for my life. Now, it feels like I can breathe again." "You deserve that," Alexander said, his voice gentle. "Both of you do." Mia turned to him, her eyes searching his. "You've done so much for us. I don't even know how to thank you." Alexander hesitated, then reached for her hand. "You don't have to thank me. You've given me something I never thought I'd have, a reason to fight for something beyond myself." Their gazes held, the unspoken connection between them deepening. In that moment, Alexander realized he wasn't just protecting Mia and Lucas out of duty. He cared for them in a way he hadn't allowed himself to care for anyone in years. As the weeks turned into months, the threat of Kessler's allies diminished. Alexander's relentless efforts to dismantle the remaining pieces of Kessler's network bore fruit, and life at the estate began to settle into a peaceful routine. One afternoon, Alexander found Lucas playing with toy cars in the garden. He knelt beside the boy, watching as he carefully lined up the cars in a row. "Are you building a racetrack?" Alexander asked, his tone warm. Lucas nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, but it's missing something." "What's that?" Lucas looked up, his face serious. You should race with me." Alexander couldn't help but laugh. "All right, let's build it together." Mia watched from the veranda as they worked, her heart swelling. The guarded man she had met weeks ago was gone, replaced by someone who had opened his life and heart to her and her son. Later that evening, as they sat together under the stars, Alexander made a quiet but momentous decision. Turning to Mia, he spoke earnestly, leaving no room for doubt. I want you and Lucas to stay here, not because you need protection, but because this feels right. I want us to build something together, a life, a future. Mia's breath caught, her eyes glistening. Are you sure, Alexander? We've already taken so much from you. You've given me more than I ever imagined, he said, his voice steady. A reason to hope, a family. Tears slipped down Mia's cheeks as she nodded, her hand reaching for his. Then yes, we'd love that. Alexander, Mia, and Lucas began to weave their lives together in the following months. Alexander stepped back from the corporate world, choosing to focus on philanthropy. Inspired by Mia's story, he established a foundation to support single parents and victims of exploitation, ensuring no one else would have to endure what she had. Mia found her purpose, helping Alexander run the foundation. Her resilience and compassion became a guiding force, inspiring countless families to rebuild their lives. For Lucas, the estate became a playground and a sanctuary. Under Alexander's guidance, the boy began to thrive, his laughter filling the once quiet halls of the mansion. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Alexander looked around at the people who had changed his life. This is what I've been missing, he said quietly. Mia smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. And now you'll never have to miss it again. As the fire crackled softly, their future stretched filled with promise and love. Together, they had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever came next. The estate, once a symbol of isolation, had become a home, a place where hope flourished, love blossomed, and new beginnings were born.